This is Pinhead from the Hellraiser series. This one is Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, etc. The back there you've got Frankenstein. Then you've got Reagan from The Exorcist. Well, as you can see, I'm a huge fan of horror movies. That's part of why I'm doing the Spooky Hat Club, which is the Horror and Theology Club at St Ethelwold. And I've been a huge fan of horror movies since I was a very young child. Initially, I started off with the Universal black and white movies from the 30s and 40s, like these posters over here. There's The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, and then we've got Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman. Horror movies, by their very nature, do take on theological concepts, whether you like it or not, because every horror movie, no matter what it is the battle between good and evil. Yes? And predominantly horror movies, good nearly always wins. Even when you think about the long franchises like Friday the 13th and Halloween, which have been going on for 30 years, when they come to the end of those franchises, good still wins. People consume them as cheap throwaway entertainment and mindless fun on a Friday night with a beer and some popcorn and some friends, but they do address very particular theological issues. And if you stop and think about what's going on in those films just for a second, they become fascinating. You have to divorce yourself slightly from sometimes the ludicrous storyline and just look at why are they doing this, how are they doing this, and what does this actually mean? In our first film, The Unholy, it predominantly centers around what at first appears to be the miracle of a curing of a deaf girl and by the Virgin Mary. Yes. So what the questions we're going to ask around that is, where do we see the place of miracles in modern society? Do we believe that miracles happen? And if they do, what do they look like? Yeah? And it starts people thinking about, well, is that a miracle or is that scientific? And there's a subtext to the entire film about how do you know what's true? Yeah, which ties into social media. Social media is full of social influencers telling us we should think this, we should wear that, we should buy this. But how do you know what's true? It sounds true, but is it true? And how do you work that out? We've got Elvira, horror hostess. I don't think there's too much of a problem with showing horror movies in the church because has anybody ever opened a Bible? It's full of horror, and we preach on it and talk about it and read from it every Sunday. Look at some of the Old Testament. I mean, there's rapes, beheadings, there's ghostly hands writing on walls, there's armies of skeletons rising up, there's floods that drown everybody. All of that kind of stuff. You get into the New Testament, you've got resurrections here, you've got, just look at the Revelation of John. The horror imagery in the book of Revelation is spectacular. So we deal with these kind of supernatural ideas and horror themes on a weekly basis throughout the lectionary. And of course, the other thing is that what most people aren't aware of is that most of the characters and tropes that we recognize as being modern-ish horror movies have some biblical bias, some biblical base. We as Christians believe that Jesus' blood helps us to have eternal life. What does Dracula do? He drinks blood so he can live forever. It's based in a biblical idea. Yeah? So I think a church setting is entirely appropriate for these kind of things. I'm hoping it appeals to anybody that wants to come along, as long as they're over 18, because of the nature of the films. We have to have an age limit on it. But I don't mind if you're 19 or 90. I don't mind if you've got all the money in the world or you live in a shared council flat down the road. It doesn't matter. Just come along, think about what we're talking about, and it hopefully will lead people to start examining what they believe and where faith is in their life, if they have any.